So Exodus chapter 3, starting at verse 1, just verse 1 through to verse 10. Exodus chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So there we have Moses and the burning bush as he comes into contact with God and as God speaks to him about God's plan. Now, over this last maybe week or 10 days, a lot of you, certainly younger ones I would guess, and probably a lot of you older ones as well, will have been to maybe a bonfire or a fireworks display. And one of the things you'll notice with a bonfire is it burns, and then what's left the next morning? Ashes. There's not a lot left, is it? It burns up and it's gone. Do you want sweet? Do you want sweet? I mean, I don't have any. Third time I had to ask him, some of you. When a fire burns, it burns up whatever's burning and it's gone. But this bush that was burning in the desert, it was burning and not disappearing. It was just burning and burning, and that stood out to Moses. So Moses went over and he learnt some wonderful things about God. Some wonderful truths in them first few verses. Verse 4, to start with, we learn that God speaks. God speaks to Moses. And that's a wonderful thing. You know, God speaks still today. Through his word, as we spend time in prayer, God speaks to us today. We learnt in verse 5 that God is holy. And we learnt about that in Sunday school, how Moses took off his sandals because the place where he was standing was holy ground. God is a holy God. Verse 6, we learnt that God is the one true God of old. He's the God of Moses' descendants. He's the God from the beginning of time. Verse 7 is a great verse too. We learn there that God sees, God hears, and God cares. Sometimes in life we feel as though God doesn't hear. The Bible tells us very clearly that God hears our prayer. We sometimes feel as though God can't see what we're doing. The Bible tells us that God sees all that we do. And here the Bible tells us that God cares about each and every single one of us. God cares for his people. And verse 8, God will rescue his people. And as we see in the later weeks, God rescues his people. Then Moses is full of excuses. Can any of Sunday school tell me one or two of the excuses that Moses had for why he wasn't good enough to do the job? Can anybody think of any? What's your thoughts, James? That was one of the ones. He said, yeah, well, I can't speak very well. He said, I can't speak very well, so I can't go to talk to Pharaoh. And we learn how Moses was so inadequate. He wasn't qualified to do this great task. But we learn that God was a truly powerful God, an amazing God, and it was him who would help Moses to complete the tasks he had for him. Now we're just going to sing a couple of choruses as we take a little break.